And I'm here, as always. We're live, 7:23. I'm a little bit late. I don't have a whole bunch of time tonight, but we're going to get some stuff in. We're going to talk about air-to-air intercourse. To air is human. That's why I put that, little play on words there. So the question is, if you take a look at the thumbnail that I have up, if you haven't, I'm going to describe it to you. I'm going to go to that right now, and we're going to bring that up. You won't be able to see it, but I'll be able to see it. So what we have is a turbocharged, I'm thinking that it's a 5.3 liter. We have the Holley/Hooker single turbo setup on it. We have a big front mounted air-to-air intercooler, something we don't normally run when I'm on the engine dyno, particularly for this reason that we're talking about. We have what is probably an S480 turbo blowing through it. This intercooler is actually a ProCharger intercooler, so it's a 3.5 in, 3.5 out. It's the big unit that we've used. We've made over 1,000 horsepower with it without any problem. And it has always shown fairly good, charge temperature reduction. As I said, 3.5 in, 3.5 out, going into the truck manifold and the factory throttle body truck manifold on our 5.3 liter. So it's a turbo, and this photo actually came from a test that I did where we compared the air-to-air versus air-to-water. And on the air-to-water, we also used a ProCharger unit, much, much smaller, because you can get all into the density of water and efficiency and all that stuff. But the air-to-water intercooler can be much smaller, basically, compared to a comparably efficient air-to-air intercooler. And then people can argue back and forth, and I'm sure that we'll get that in the comments. They're arguing back and forth about what works better and when it works better. And there are different applications that I would use air-to-air versus air-to-water for. On the engine dyno, we typically run air-to-water intercoolers because we have an unlimited source of water, and so we can keep the transfer medium temperature pretty consistent, and it doesn't, packaging makes it easier and all of that stuff. So, and if you see this photo, you'll also see why we don't normally run air-to-air intercoolers. And so the question tonight is to try to maximize the efficiency of this air-to-air intercooler. What we did was we have one of these big squirrel cage fans that's blowing air through this. Also, the whole engine dyno room has a massive amount of airflow going through because it has a big extraction fan on the backside on what would be the, behind the dyno on the exhaust side that draws all the air out. It has two big inlets on either side of the front of the dyno. That's where the air comes in. So they come in from up top, from up on the roof of the building. And so you get, good, clean, cold air if it's cold outside, or hot air if it's the summertime, but you get air coming in and flowing back, of course. So the whole thing is really, it's for an internal combustion engine, especially a turbo one, it's kind of an ideal situation. And also for an air-to-air intercooler, it works very well. But what we did to further optimize that is we have all that airflow coming in. We also have the fan blowing air. Because of our shrouding, the air can't escape and go around it. So all the air from the fan that's drawing that cold air in, it has to go through the core. That works fairly well. My question is, does it work as well as, and that's going to be our poll for tonight, does it work as well as the way that it does in the car? Dyno setup. Simulate. Okay, so the poll for tonight will be, and this is intercooler related because it's on topic, can the dyno setup simulate what happens to an air-to-air intercooler in the vehicle at speed? We're going to talk about that. But that is our poll for tonight. So we have an air-to-air intercooler, and as we know, first of all, we have an intercooler because when we boost something, we run it boost from a turbo or supercharger. We heat up the air. the intercooler is there to cool that back off and hopefully make it less likely to detonate, and also hopefully to help it make more power. So two good benefits of intercooling, and I always recommend them. Lots of guys don't want to run it. I run E85, I don't need an intercooler, or I have a blow through carburetor, I don't need an intercooler. You'd be better off with intercoolers in both of those, and every other combination. Intercoolers work well, they always help, and they're good to have. And then you can argue about the weight and complexity versus the power gain that you get for the track and my lightweight car and all that stuff. That's all fine. Intercoolers are good. They're one of the things that I always recommend, and having more intercooler is always better. And yes, even if you have big tubes and all that, that's all fine. We've already demonstrated that the discharge tube side has very little to do with what's going on with response and power and that stuff. So, but this is an air-to-air intercooler. And so we have a big fan and a dedicated shroud to get cold air. We have cold air all around it coming in and around the engine, and that all works fairly well. The question is, can we simulate what's going on there with a fixed fan speed? We turn it up all the way basically to have more flow than you would get at. And then this is one of the things that we need to talk about is, are we getting the amount of airflow through that core that you get in a vehicle? So we need to take a look at this, because this is not just an absolute question. So this is not just a flow question, because the problem is we have variable flow rates through the core at different speeds. We also have different starting temperatures, something that the dyno actually benefits from. So on the dyno, if we turn the fan on and then start the motor, or even if the motor is running and we turn the fan on, we have some fixed amount of flow. Now, even if that amount of flow is not as much as it is when the vehicle is going, you can pick your speed, 100 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour, 130, whatever you're running in the quarter. People always pick the highest speed. Oh, I'm trapping at 138. Okay, great. But how often in that race are you going 138? Only as you cross the stripe. So that's when that much airflow is going through the car or through the intercooler because of the speed of the vehicle. For all the rest of that drag strip run, you're going a lot less than that. When you start, you're going nothing. And all you're doing is sitting there heating up because you have no flow going through it. There's no airflow going through your air-to-air intercooler. So you just did your burnout. Maybe you idled the thing in the pits, maybe in the staging lane. You started it up because you were next to go. You're running it. You have no airflow through it. So the thing is, you don't have any boost going through it either. But if it's close to the radiator and you have temperature coming from the radiator, all of that possibly can make the starting temperature of the intercooler higher than it would be when we're running it on the dyno. I would bet that 90 to 95% of the time, the way that when we're making a run on the engine dyno, that the intercooler core itself, which is going to help determine how efficient it is, because if we can get the temperature core, the temperature of the core down, the rise in temperature may be the same, but if we're starting lower, we're going to end lower. So it's going to be better. That's always better to start with a lower temperature. You're going to end with a lower temperature, and then having a lower temperature, having a lower average temperature means you're going to, theoretically, you could make more average power. So from a starting standpoint, I think the dyno has it over the way that the intercooler is on the street or on the track, at least in a drag race application. If you're already at speed, like at the Silver State, an air-to-air is really the way to go, because you have an unlimited amount of speed and you're at that speed for a really, really long time. So you have all the airflow and you're going really fast. Bonneville, not a good application for that. I mean, you do have lots of airflow, but it would also include lots and lots of drag. Lots of guys run air-to-airs and they work, but Bonneville, because you don't care about weight, is a much better application for an air-to-water core. And then you can add ice water and make even more power because you can never get the temperature down on an air-to-air that you can on an air-to-water with ice water. So it's a much better application for that. But we'll get back to our comparison. So running it on the dyno when we're starting probably benefits, again, but it's not the same. So it's probably colder on the dyno than it is when you're starting your drag race run. And then we probably don't have as much flow on the big end from our fan because it's not varying with engine speed or certainly there's no vehicle speed. So we're not varying it. So it's constant all the way through. So at some point, the amount of airflow that we get going through the air-to-air core is probably going to be more in the vehicle than it is in our simulated dyno cell. What is that trade-off point? Did the more airflow at some point help it make more power? And did that more power there offset our lower starting point? And did they reach the same at the end? So you see what I'm talking about? So if we start lower, we're going to end lower. So even if the running in the car got better at the top, it started higher and got better at the top, maybe they end at the same spot, but maybe the average number is, and see that these are the things, these are the things that drive me nuts, is when people will tell you, oh yeah, you can, and these are people that have air-to-air intercoolers, and because they have them, they swear by them, and then everything else is bad. So I have an air-to-air intercooler. You're running on a dyno. There's no way you can simulate what's going on in the car. I just walked us through all of these things. we could get fairly close probably if we added more fans or, step the speed of the fan up. There are ways to get around that. The question is, and this is more the important question, because we just talked about, well, if we start off lower, did we end at the same spot? If we started off higher and they get more efficient, and we start off lower and get less efficient. The other question is are both of those more than efficient enough to do everything that core has the ability to do? So if we have, and the effectiveness of the core is going to be a function of, one, of the flow rate of the amount of flow that you get for your transfer medium, which in this case would be ambient air, and also the temperature of the ambient air. If we're testing it on a 50-degree day or a 60-degree day, obviously the air-to-air intercooler is going to be working fairly well. If we're testing it on a 100-degree day, and that's what we're using, it's going to be less effective. Same thing when you're running it at the track. If it's a 60-degree day, you're going to be making more power than on a day that's 100 degrees. The intercooler is not going to be working as well. The cooling is not going to be as good. So a lot of that stuff also comes into play. But again, do we have more than enough flow in both cases to do all that core is going to do, basically? So let's say that we have 300 degrees of air going in at some boost level and that we have 110 coming out. Let's say we have cold ambient air and we have that situation. What if we have that situation on both of them? So are we going to get the same power? Is it possible that we could have that situation with both of these, with both the dyno setup and with even though we have a difference in the way that they're applying it, can we get the same power from both of them? And are we simulating what's actually going to happen at the track? It's a lot of stuff to discuss, I know. But when the people say, well, you can't simulate the amount of airflow that goes through the car, and therefore, because I've said that, and because we know that that's true, or at least an argument can be made that is accurate, we can now negate everything that you've done, because there's no way that your test that you're doing shows what that intercooler can do. And what I can guarantee you is that it 100% does. Because what we're doing, like with this photo, what we're doing there makes the intercooler work as good as it's going to work. Even if we get a whole bunch more airflow, only if we were to make the run a lot longer and put more heat for a longer period of time, would we start to worry, because the dyno pull is, although it lasts longer than a typical quarter-mile run, we're not going through the gears and stuff, so it is a little bit different. But like I said, we have an optimized situation where the turbo is grabbing cold air to begin with, which in a lot of cases it's not. We started off cooler, and it has the temperature drop that we see when this kind of system is also run at the track. We know because we have lots of data from the track as well. So when somebody runs 20 pounds of boost with their air-to-air intercooler, and then they share data logs with me, because that happens a lot. They will do that. And because I want to know, okay, you're running this combination. Cool. What is your charge temperature like at the end of the run? What's happening to it? And then I said, okay, well, when we did it, our charge temperature is this. And they're like, how can that be? I'm like, well, what is your starting charge temperature? And they're like, it's this high. I'm like, oh yeah, see, that's starting out higher. And so we're starting out quite a bit lower than that. So even though our dyno pull from 3,000 to 6,500 at 300 RPM per second lasts longer than your quarter mile run does, we're starting out at a lower temperature, and therefore we're ending at a little bit better temperature, even though ours takes a little bit longer to do. So I used to get this all the time. I used to get it mostly with the Pro Charger guys that were like, oh yeah, we have an air-to-air intercooler and it works great. And it did. We've used it many times and it does work well. But that was a lot of times the argument is that you can't, I remember them saying that they were going to hook up a quad motor or something to drive these fans because they needed more, airflow, and they needed all this stuff. And I'm like, I really think that there's an easier way for you to not simulate the amount of airflow that goes through it, but for you to simulate what happens with that core while somebody's making a run. Because that's the important thing. We can't get this hurricane gale force like airflow going through this the way that you can if you're moving that core through the air in some sort of radiator enclosed deal. You can't get that sort of flow, at 120, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, whatever. But you can make it do what it does when it's doing that, because it's not doing that for very long. It's only doing that a very portion. But everybody that has an air-to-air uses that. And like I said, the only time a guy can really make that argument is if he's at the Silver State and he's running, or he's out on the Autobahn or somewhere like that. Maybe in a boat, but in a boat you have an unlimited source of water, and usually because it's a lake, it's going to be fairly cold water, or certainly colder than the discharge temperature is going to be. So you would be foolish not to use that, or to stick a big air-to-air intercooler, like, up on your big wing that you have on your boat, I guess. So it'd be much better to use that. So I'm curious to see what you guys are going to say about the can the dyno setup simulate what happens to an air-to-air intercooler in the vehicle at speed? 69% are saying no. See, that's why I do these videos. It's interesting. So I'm gonna scroll back and see what you guys are doing, because I think we can. I don't think it simulates the amount of flow that we get, but I think it simulates what that intercooler core does. And by the way, when we did the comparison between an air-to-air and an air-to-water at, I don't think it was like 800 or 900 horsepower deal or whatever, there was very little change between running ambient dyno water, or I don't even think it was ambient. I think it was probably 85 degrees. And then I need to look back and see what the temperature of the day was, but it was less than 85 degrees. So we're using fairly cold air, and they made essentially the same kind of charge temperatures. They both work, is what I'm saying. And there wasn't a big change in what we did between those two intercooler cores. And we've talked about this many times, that if you're choosing one of these over the other, normally it's not because one's more efficient. I mean, as an absolute thing, an air to water will make more power, because you can put ice water in it and you can make it a lot colder. So you can get away with a lot more with ice water than you can with ambient water or an air to air, because you can never get it that cold. I'm dipping it in, short of dipping it in liquid nitrogen, which would be problematic in and of itself. But in most normal things, the air to air and the air to water that we've run seem to make comparable deals in your normal kind of street strip applications. And I know that people will talk about, oh yeah, but you get heat soak, and we can talk about all that because we have a lot of times. So I'm going to scroll back and see what you guys are doing. Yep. To hair is human. That's right. Good evening, everybody. First thumbs up. That's what I like to hear. Now, everybody else, follow him. I haven't run the chili bomb yet. I haven't been back down to West Tech. Personally, I blame turkeys. Richard, have you ever tested the Pulsar turbos? I have not. Can't get enough airflow through an air-to-air intercooler on the dyno. Even the best electric fan doesn't hold a candle to freeway or higher speeds. Oh, Dan. Did you ever stick your arm out the window? Dan, you're asking the wrong question. We already went over that. I already went over that we can't simulate that airflow. But does all of that extra airflow, which by the way, most of it is not used. Most of it is wasted. In fact, the vast majority of airflow through that core at 150 miles an hour is wasted and doesn't go through the core anyway. It goes around it. So you're only using a very, very small portion of that because nobody has a direct duct to their core so that all you get is all the airflow that's in front of the car through their intercooler core, because that can't happen. So you're only using a portion of that, and you're getting whatever cooling you're getting. The question isn't, can we simulate the airflow? Because that's the wrong way to look at it. What you need to look at it is, can we simulate the cooling that's happening with that airflow, even at 60 miles an hour, at 40 miles an hour, at 100 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour? Can we simulate that? And the answer to that question is yes, we can. When in doubt, ask Dan and just learn in this case. I'm not into fan polls. I'll be abstaining. We're heading for the first 100% pull. It won't be 100%. Accidentally hit yes. Even the best OnlyFans, those are good though. I've changed my mind. I'm going to accidentally vote no, so James can be happy. So you're offsetting James's vote. I get it. That's good. What about roll racing? It's very common for people to do 50 rolls. That's good. They should. James, you've seen air-to-air intercourse get to 20 degrees. So you had an ambient temperature that was below 20 degrees. If making an NA engine turbo, how important critical is a tighter ring gap that it will have to do performance and longevity? Does the amount of boost make the bigger difference? I don't know if 6 to 7 pounds is okay for NA gap or not. Do you know what the gap is? If you can tell me what that NA gap is, if you've taken it apart and you can actually measure it and tell me what it is, then I'll tell you if that's going to be okay. Lots of people do run that low boost with the stock ring gap, whatever it is. I can't guarantee you that it's not going to break though. I have an original 97 5.7. What do I upgrade? What 5.7 is it? Is it a Chevy? Is it an LS1? Is it a Hemi? Upgrade your testing gear, Richard. Get a wind tunnel. I don't need a wind tunnel to do this. This is not about wind tunnel. It's not about airspeed. We're back on the tip. At high speed, doesn't the engine bay build air pressure, which would reduce the flow through the intercooler? It does. It builds up pressure, but it depends on how they're ducting all of that. Six to 7 pounds on a 6.8 V10 makes 650 wheel horsepower. On a 6.8 V10, so the Ford one? How is a Ford one going to make 650 wheel horsepower at 7 pounds? Not a stock one? I would like to see an air-to-air intercooler that gets, 300 degree charge temperature back down to ambient. I would like to see the intercooler efficiency that does that on an air-to-air. How did I get a garage? What's up? I finally made a live video for about 2 minutes and I have to get back to work. Oh, I thought you were saying you made a live video. We were going to watch it, but you made it here to a live video. Towing uphill with heavy trailer, your buddy starts past you and has a chip Duramax. What are you going to do? Most of the time, the radiator is close to the intercooler core. Almost, yeah, it almost has to be. I mean, that's usually the open space for. I like air-to-air intercoolers, and like I said, we already gone over the different applications where I would use them. The Omni is a perfect example. That has an air-to-air intercooler, and will continue to have one. Although I will be testing an air-to-water intercooler, especially a chili bomb. If a chili bomb works well, it's got to get a chili bomb, but I will be testing other air-to-air intercoolers, but it will have that, and driving around, they work pretty well. But only if you're going 150 miles an hour, because otherwise they don't work. Hose clamp 557 Ford 10-to-1, 790 horsepower at 6,500. That's a good one. Top rings at 20, seconds at 22. 6 psi is safe. Sure. What's the bore size on that? Is it 400 or 500 or something? Or is it smaller than that? Yeah, it's not even, that won't even be 5 thousandths per inch of bore. Milo's doing good. Lisa and I took him out up in the hills today. He doesn't even want to stop anymore. We usually stop at this one section where the trees and stuff are, and we usually stop there and sit and rest because it's a fairly steep climb. But he's like, dude, let's go. Why are you stopping? We're not stopping anymore. That was the old Milo. This is a new Milo, all the way to the top. Richard, OEM air-to-air on Subaru is good at heat choking. Yeah, was that the top-mounted stuff where all of the heat rises up through? What about a water spray bar? That can be helpful. Is there a list on these live chats that can show us who is on here? I don't think I have access to that. Richard, would intercooler fans be restricting airflow? Do people have intercooler fans on the back sides of them? Those can be beneficial at low speeds, but maybe restrictive at higher speeds. Can the dyno simulate forced air ambient through impeller? Yeah, you're trying to pressurize the inlet of the turbo from vehicle speed? Tom, good evening, Richard. You ought to explain the 14.7 psi boost phenomenon, as in why that number to double the horsepower, because you're doubling atmospheric pressure. For those that may be wondering about it, whenever you mention it, or 1 bar, because it's one app, it's because you already have your NA engine is breathing through 1 atmosphere, and then now you have another one. Yeah, the top mounted intercoolers are not good. There have been a few of those from the factory, and putting a front mount in place of that is much better. If you're dynoed with a small intercooler that choked a large motor but worked with a smaller motor on a dyno test and showed the output, I have an air-to-air intercooler comparison that we did up on the channel, where we ran a ProCharger, a centrifugal supercharger, and we used this intercooler core that I have in the photo, but we ran it first with the smaller version. So the smaller version, and then when we put the bigger version on, the thing made like 1,000 horsepower. And I think it was down, let's say that it was down 50 or 60 horsepower, whatever the number was. That smaller intercooler core would have no problem feeding a 4 or 5 or 600 or 700 horsepower motor. It would be able to do that because it flows enough to do that. It's only when you get up to the flow limit of that core that you run into problems. So it would have no problem feeding the output of a smaller motor. Richard, would you prefer a low RPM, high torque engine or a high RPM, high horsepower engine? It depends on what you're trying to get done. How old is Milo? Milo's now 12 and a half. Richard, what's the lowest inlet air temp you've seen on ProChargers with an air-to-air intercooler? It would depend on what boost level we ran, but I've never seen something that's ambient temperature though. Ram air into the turbo. That's good. It works good. We actually had positive pressure on our turbo at Bonneville. I mean, we have lots of vehicle speed there. I mean, we went 227 there, or 226 and change. But again, we were only doing that through the 4th mile marker. And we actually kept minimizing the opening because we were not having a cooling problem with going this speed. And so we were more, it was more important for us to have minimal drag because that's the same as adding horsepower. And because we had the turbo, we could add horsepower. But because we had the inlet of the turbo, we had a big filter, like a giant size, this one, 4-inch deal, and then a big 4-inch tube that wrapped around. But we had all of that fenced off and then a sealed opening for the tube to go through. And everything going into the radiator was fenced off so that we were building positive pressure in there, and we had 1.3 or 1.4 pounds of positive pressure going into the turbo. The top mount on the intercooler does look cool, but unfortunately, it doesn't work that well. Let's see. Look onto the top of the chat, look at the right, click the 3 dots and allow you to select participants. Let's see. Oh yeah, we can look at participants. See, I'm learning something new every day. Fabrications, you might be able to do that at altitude because you'd be making less power anyway, and you'd be making, you could double the corrected power. The problem is that when you run these things like on a chassis dyno, the dynos are set up to correct for NA power, and they're not set up to to correct for self-compensating power adders like a turbo that will spin faster at altitude if you're regulating it based on pressure. So you might actually see more than that on the dyno. I think Vortex still does make their aftercoolers. James, what is it you want me to look at on the log? Yes, the cold weather is very good for turbo. I used to love it because I didn't have an intercooler on my Vortec supercharged Mustang, but I used to love like when we would go out to the Silver State race on the times that it was cold, and it really liked being cold. No, there's dots above the pole, up where it says top chat, and then if you go across from top chat, above where the pole is. Lower than ambient inlet air temperatures with air to water using chemicals. Yeah, that you can use AC systems to do that. That's been done a lot. I watched Buddy Ingersoll recharge the intercooler on his Pro Stock Regal with liquid nitrogen. That's kind of cool. Which turbo manufacturers did the Dodge come with? They came with a couple of different ones. I think that the one that I have is a Garrett. Richard, this is Danny's daughter, Daniela. Hello, Daniela. I was wondering if you know how many engines you have ever tested. I don't know what the number is. It'd be interesting. I'd have to go back. There's actually a lot of dyno data that I don't have because I've been doing it for long enough that Westech has upgraded their dyno software a few times. And a lot of the early stuff that I had on there is not there anymore, unfortunately. Like I can't find when I did 8 camshafts on the small block Ford. I was doing lots of early small block Ford stuff. So it'd be hard for me to determine how many I've actually done. So, but James, are you trying to tell me that you have lower than ambient temperatures from an air-to-air intercooler? Because if you're saying that, don't bother sending me the logs because that's not a real thing. So exposed inlets are for colder air, not speeding up the compressor or take less exhaust pressure to drive it, hence limiting back pressure. Exposed inlets into the impeller into a turbo, like guys that have a forward-facing turbo that have it in front of the car or whatever, and they got a big raised entry on there. Do multiple things. You're getting cold air, but you're also getting pressure to feed the turbo. And if you pressure feed the turbo, the flow rate of the turbo will increase. So it can make more power, assuming that you're trying to max out the turbo. Spray the intercooler with CO2. I've done that. We did it with nitrous though, but the nitrous didn't seem to change the charge temperatures that much. Mitsubishi turbos, yeah. Have you tried different intercooler pipe diameters? Yeah, those videos are up, and we did remote turbo stuff too. How can you track down if it's your intercooler or radiator that's not keeping up with the street turbo system? How would the radiator affect the inlet air temperature? Are you not getting flow through there? Evo Turbo GLH. James, ambient can't get lower on an air-to-air setup. Yeah, it can't. Only ice or interchiller. Yep. Oh, interchiller result. So you're chilling the air before it goes in with using the Freon system. Richard, I have a set of Windsor SRs on my 302. My E303 doesn't make power down low. What cam would fit best? An E303 doesn't make power down low? What intake manifold do you have? I have high coolant temps and air temp readings and the Holley pulse timing. Does it do that only at wide open throttle? Is it also hot when you're cruising? Is it only during the summer? What is your pulley setup on your water pump? The inner chiller. So how's our poll doing? 68% are saying no, that we cannot simulate that. Good speed causes stall of the airflow going through the intercooler. I kind of would like to examine that because I'd like to see what happens when we get pressure build up in the engine bay. I'd like to see what happens to the airflow through the core, or if enough is spilling out down through the bottom of the motor, down under the car, basically, to get that thing to still have flow through it. I'd like to see what that is. It would be cool to have a flow meter going through there to see what's happening at speed. I feel like running the compressor on the AC system is probably a bigger loss than the gain from the temperature drop. It's not, though. I mean, if you can get the inlet air temperature down to ambient or below ambient, if people are saying that's possible to get it below ambient, because the temperature for the phase change is going to be way below. It's going to be way below ambient. So if you can do that, you can pick up more power than whatever it costs to drive that AC system. GT40 intake manifold, E303, Windsor Senior, a bit big for a 302. Doesn't pick up until 4,000. Different cam, or should I bump the compression? An E303 is not really a very big cam. Did you look at the dyno results that we did an E303 just recently, and we ran a bunch of GT40 manifolds. So take a look at the power curve and see if you think if something is not missing there. I don't think that those are great cylinder heads. In fact, if you look at the video that I have up, I don't know if we did a Windsor Senior, though. I had those on our World Challenge motor, and we used that motor in the Miata when we ran the Silver State. But these were ported versions that somebody did, and I don't know. I don't even remember flowing them. Some did a clear-sided intercooler. I've seen that. That's very cool. And did a smoke test. That is kind of cool. The clear stuff is all kind of awesomeness. I ran an air to water on my Sprint and drove it every day and logged temperatures all the time, and even did, like, because I had a Type K thermocouple and a digital readout. I would not be opposed to taping that on my window. And we eventually ran it inside the car just so I could see what's happening. And then we also monitored water temperature while I was doing it as well, because there's no more real world than having it be real world. And we had a pump on it and a front mounted. This is basically like an oil cooler or something up in front of the radiator so that it would not heat up. I also had a plastic tank. It was basically just a gallon maybe. I don't remember if it was a gallon or 2 gallons. Just one of those red fuel cans. And we had that system circulating, and it actually worked pretty good. And when you're cruising down the road and you're not in boost, it stays at or near ambient. The water temperature does. The whole car builds high pressure zone in front of the car, which pushes most of the air to the sides at high speeds. Would an ambient temperature air to water intercooler be better than an air to air intercooler? It would certainly be, if you wanted to make an air to water intercooler, even if it was ambient temperature, if you wanted to make that better than an air to air, all you have to do is make it because it would be a lot smaller. The effectiveness of the air to water intercooler, you could package it and make it a lot smaller than this giant air to air. So if you made it a little bit bigger, it might last longer. I don't know which one of those. When we did that, they made the same power on the engine dyno. The phone app, it has no dots, nor does the YouTube mobile page and a mobile web browser. Mine only has it on my computer, my desktop. Gary went high H with the Windsor Senior at BS back in the Easy Street days. That's all fantastic. Have you ever tested a comp brand turbo? Yeah, we have. We run a few of them. I hope the user that has the number 67 in their name comes back on here. He saved me a lot of troubleshooting time on my 04 Tahoe and your P0300 code. What did it turn out to be, Shadow Ops? Air to water intercoolers are open or closed systems. They're closed systems, and they're best if they're not run off of the obviously the heated engine air or the heated engine water. Jeffrey, I have an all-wheel drive S10. Was originally getting a turbo 5.3, but I accidentally bought an L92. Rethinking things, would you go an M122 supercharger? You're going to be limited in the power that you can make with that. I mean, it'd be fun on the street. I don't know if you're trying to drag race or what you're trying to do. You could make more power with a turbo. And if it's all-wheel drive, are you concerned with the strength of the all-wheel drive? I wonder if the cooling fins of the intercooler would have more rising turbulence with air going through them as the speed increases. I think that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see what the flow rate is through the core. And I'd like to see what the flow rate is the core with a vehicle at speed, because a lot of things are happening when the vehicle is at speed that has nothing to do with if you were to have a big funnel and the intercooler up in front where all the air could pass through it like we have it on the dyno, because we have no restriction there. But I'd like to see what happens when the vehicle gets at speed, whether or not, what actually is the flow rate going through there. And at what speed is it enough, and really having more isn't going to do anything else. Richard, I misremembered the 6.8 excursion in that video on YouTube that makes 430 wheel horsepower on 5.6 pounds with dual 3076s. It was tuned. Don't know of other mods. I'll say 430 seems more realistic to me, because that motor is only like a 300 horsepower motor. And so if you had 7 pounds and it made 450, that would kind of be a realistic amount. If they did anything to it and it made more than that, then, you could make more than that. But that seems like a more math related result. A friend of mine ran a standalone turbo oiling system with an inline fuel pump and a transcooler in front. He ran ATF. He ran ATF through his turbo, and the turbo cold side housing stayed much cooler. It's not the oil going through the center section of the turbo that heats up the cold side of the turbo. It's the 1,000-degree thing, the hot side back right next to it. That's what's going to bring all the temperature into the compressor side. It's not the 180 or 200-degree oil or the center section. Would you run an air-to-air on a daily driver? Well, like I said, on my Turbo Sprint, I had an air-to-air because it came from the factory like that. And then I made it air-to-water, which was much better. and it made a lot more power with that. The factory one was not very good. It was a top mount, although not directly on top of the motor. It was mounted kind of to the side of the radiator, and it had a little scoop in the hood. And then I first made because it just had a scoop, like an opening, like it was just the air was supposed to find its way. But I made a little a fenced in ducting to go to the core so that hopefully all the air, if it did go through there. And again, if there's pressurized air in the engine compartment and that's hitting it's not even a good naked duct, it's just a slit. So I didn't even know how much air was going through there. It might be that hot air was coming back out the other side. But I did what I could to make that better, and then eventually just got rid of that and put the air to water in there. And the charge temperatures were quite a bit lower with the air to water, and the flow rate of the air to water that I did was much better. Injectors 2 and 7 were bad. This is after the truck sat for 5 years. They can gum up, that's for sure. Richard, is it safe to turbo a 6-liter LQ4 that has been sleeved? Yeah, the sleeve should be strong. My inlet air temperatures don't get too high on the streetcar. You just don't stay in boost that long. Yeah, you probably don't. I mean, where can you go all of the gears all the way to the end of whatever fourth gear, fifth gear is? Richard, have you done any testing of E85 and LSA LSs? Yes, lots of it. Seems to be conflicting information if it's worth it on naturally aspirated LS. We haven't found there to be hardly any power on any 4.8 or 5.3 or 6.0. It does seem to be worth power on the direct injected LT stuff, and it does seem to be worth power on a naturally aspirated Coyote. But when we've tested on the motors that I've tested it on the NA ones, we don't see very much. See a lot when it's boosted, but very little when it's NA. Would a turbo run on ATF lubrication? I don't. I mean, it is lubrication, so maybe it will run. I don't think that the bearings are designed for that. The SVO Mustang is another application of a top mount. It's just awful. When we would run them on the chassis dyno, I would sit there with an air nozzle, and even that's not enough flow, but it made us feel better. And I would air nozzle the thing. First, I would air nozzle the thing and cool it down after the run that we'd run before, because it gets really hot, especially when you're running like, 20 pounds of boost. So we would get that all cooled off, and then while they were making the run, I would spray air on it too. Again, it probably just made me feel better. Could you do a test with a standard 5.3 versus a 4.8 stroked 6-liter? That's not going to tell you bore and stroke or rod ratio. It's only going to tell you that one of those motors is bigger than the other one, and the bigger one is going to make more power. Because a 6-liter, a D-stroke 6-liter is going to be bigger than 5.3. I think it's going to be 330 inches or something, if I remember right. And bore to stroke ratio or rod ratio. But the problem, and also the problem with that is you'd be changing both of those. You'd be changing the rod length, and you would be changing the bore and stroke. So which one of those, if there's a change in power, so you have a change in displacement, and then theoretically you could get get it compensated so you don't have a change also in compression, but you have a change in displacement, a change in rod length, and then a change in bore versus stroke. So if there is a change in power, which one of those things did it? 330 reminds me of the 305 stroker. I've never built a stroker version of those. I remember seeing a test and being very, very disappointed way back in the hot rod days. I don't remember if it's hot rod or Carcraft or Popular Hot Rodding may have been, but they took a 305 and they, and I think that this was in the TunePort days, and they took the stock TunePort heads and cam and induction system and then put like a 383 underneath it, and it made a lot more torque, but it didn't make almost any more horsepower. And I remember being disappointed, not really understanding what was going on, obviously, but it does show you what happens when you have restrictive heads and intake manifold. Lots of detergents in ATF. Yep. How about making a water-cooled donut that goes between both sides of the turbo? Well, you just run a water-cooled center section. That will help, and that's much better than, because the problem is you have that big hot thing wanting to get the front side of the cold thing hot, and that's not good. Having some kind of, like you're talking about, a donut or some sort of water insulated jacket, but then you have to start thinking about, well, is that hurting response? You just need an insulator or something that's going to keep the cold side cold. Blankets do a pretty good job of that, and a blanket helps keep the temperature in the hot side. TPI heads and intake are great for a 305. But what about the L98? What about the 350 version with the aluminum heads? Because 350. Fun. So we haven't finished the projects quick enough for you? Thermal mass of a cold intercooler will cool the charge for several seconds before it gets hot enough. That's true. Even if we have no flow in the intercooler core, like if we're doing an air-to-air and we have no water flow through the air-to-water, it still works. The intercooler core by itself with no airflow going through it at all still works. The charge temperature is still lower than it was when it was boosted. So, Joe, you want a turbo that is a step up from the GT45, is a T4, and it's more responsive down low and has more power on top? You're going to have to spend money for that. A real, I don't know, 366 or something like that from Garrett probably would do that. Not one of the low buck turbos, I don't think is going to be able to offer both of those things. The GT45 is not terribly responsive for its size, but it is cheap. Precision 67, 75. I'm trying to think about, I think, that might be a 67 that I gave to Jimmy. I have him remind me of that. Whoever was concerned about hot section of the turbo, you can always install a marine turbo, water jacket. A lot of the aftermarket stuff has water cooled center sections. Richard, I was told that an LQ4 board to 4065 should only be used NA and not boosted. Is this true? I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't ever go to that bore size on an LQ4 on a turbo application, because there's no need to do that. I don't know why you'd want to go that big when you have boost that will be worth way more than any over bore size would be worth. Do you know what thickness the sleeves are now after you've bored it to a 4065? Tree 50 versus Tree 80 tree. Have an 87 Firebird Formula 350 with iron heads. It's an 87 TPI peak horsepower at 4,400. Yeah, but it's a 350, not a factory one then, because iron heads would have been. Oh, did the Camaros and Firebirds get iron headed L98s? I thought that they were aluminum headed by then. I know 85 Corvette was an iron head, and then 86 was also part of it. Then the convertibles got aluminum heads, and then everybody got aluminum heads after that. Yeah, cooling turbo still doesn't solve compression heat generated. No, that won't change discharge temperature. It might. I don't think it will. I want to change my answer. The F bodies got iron heads in the 350s. That must have been we had a couple of those at West Tech, and they must have been F body versions. They weren't iron heads until LT1. On the F bodies, maybe they were though. They didn't get the aluminum headed L98s in the F bodies? I thought that everybody had. I thought you get aluminum heads. You get aluminum heads. Everybody gets aluminum heads. Roman, thank you very much. Third gen got aluminum heads on the L98. That's what I thought. I thought that only the early ones had iron heads, but 87 Firebird had iron heads. I know they had iron 305 heads. Uh, 113 and 128 heads were aluminum Corvette. 083 were iron F body head, no aluminum on third gens. Wow. If you want to keep your engine bay cool, you need to gold foil it. Sean, have you done any testing on 13.8 versus 14.7 AFR at idle? Does it have any effect on engine temp? That's not something we would see on the engine dyno. We'd have to do that. You have to do that in the car. Because we have so much cold water and stuff that we're not going to see an idle test. Ultra, thank you very much. I had an 85 Corvette, an 85 tune port, the first year of the tune port, and that car ran good. It ran 1390s. It had a throttle body airfoil on it and a K&N. Uh-oh. The tune port guys are going at it. It's all fun and games. So somebody mentions aluminum heads. Let's see. Keep your engine bay, gold foil. That's it. Do what they did on the McLaren F1s. Rich, I have an 04 Suburban 2500 LQ4, looking for a nice cam, heads, and intake setup to increase power with a nice exhaust rumble. So good for towing. The Truck Norris cam would be really good for that. You could probably use the heads that you have on it, although they're going to be 317 heads. So you could put if you want another factory head, you could either go the rec port head route, and they would certainly make more power. They would make a lot more than a cathedral port head would, or put a 799 or a 706 head. Those would be, the 706 certainly be really inexpensive to do. The 799 head is a little bit harder to find, but they're out there. Or the rec port head, like I said, would make more power. You just have to change the intake. Also, for an intake manifold on a cathedral port head, I would pick a Trailblazer SS. Probably that's, you could use your stock truck intake. It also works, but that combination would work well. Sure. Do you know if anybody has a hard block Yoku4 board to 4065? I'm trying to get more cues because I'm a horsepower junkie. But are you running boost, or are you just doing an NA version? And how much do you really think you're going to pick up going from 4030 to 4065? And if you're going to run boost on it, don't do it. Tune port intakes look cool. If they would make power high RPM, it's really hard to do with a runner length like that. Let me take a look here. Trailblazer SS came with rec port heads. No, they actually came also with LS2s, which is not a rec port head. I plan on using hood louvers. Anyone have any experience with better cooling from installing louvers? I had louvers on my Mustang, and it worked really well. You could actually see all the heat coming out of the louvers when you're stopped at a light. Would you say the DNA eBay 195 heads? I've never tested those, so I don't know anything about those. Would beat Vortec iron heads up to 500 lift. I don't think I've ever even seen those. Shadow, the D-stroke 6-liter would make it a 328. So that's bigger than a stock 5.3, right? Running an LQ4 with a GT45, night and day difference. Cheap edition. They are cheap. BTR2 truck cam, or is it worth going to a truck Norris cam? Well, you have more turbo. You'd gain way more power going up in boost with that. So we're going to close out our poll at 67% saying nope. One more minute. I'm working on nitrous cam video. Yep, that's right. Nitrous cam. Would be cool to do a hybrid vehicle that run on any kind of pump fuel, E85, diesel. It's better intake for a 5.9 RAM. It's a 2000. I have videos up on all the intake manifolds. We ran the SRT8. We ran the truck manifold, which is actually surprisingly good. And the like 300, I call it the Magnum intake manifold. That's the one that I like the best. How's a Turbo Trail 90? It won't be turbocharged. It will be supercharged. Why twice the people will vote is like, I know, I don't understand that. You guys are all going to be all sad when I'm gone, when I retire. The nitrous cam, no, the first video that's going to go up, the nitrous cam will be after this. The first one that's going up is cheap small block mods in comparison to going to the wrecking yard and picking up a Vortec motor, which is always a good idea. Oil consumption on the rotaries is a concern. I never realized when way back when my buddy had one that they were injecting oil. Guys like you don't retire. I wonder what's going to happen to the. I always wondered what's going to happen to the industry if people like me stop doing this kind of testing. New poll idea: you have to click the like or dislike to vote, so you have to register. Your questions always have the what if factor is probably why you do so much testing. Every time I mean, and it started with my very first time I was ever on a dyno when I when the very first time, certainly the very first time I was at Westech, I showed up with essentially half of a motor late to the dyno session and said, okay, I got to put this the rest of the way together. Then we could dyno test it. They're like, oh God, this guy is going to kill us. Little did they know that I would become family. But when you start testing, it just, your mind starts racing. You're like, well, what about this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And that's all that it is. It's not, you even for a while stop paying attention to all the good data that you just got. All you're doing is thinking, okay, now that we've done this, but what about this? What about this? They're finally like, look, you have to go. We're done. Get out of here. But, I still had more questions. Didn't they have oil injection in the carburetors on those rotaries, or didn't they have it somewhere on the? This was a 12A. It was like an 81, I think. Yeah, it is it is an inquiring mind kind of thing. There's always more questions after you see results, because then, and everybody asks that anytime you run any test NA, the immediate question is, yeah, but what about under boost? I'm like, it's the same. Yeah, the West Tech guys did do that. We're out. Okay, you've beaten us down. We have to leave. Just please don't blow anything up. They have oil jets in the block. They have a pump that would give it a shot of oil every few times you got on the gas. displacement. Okay, guys, time to go. Thank you all for showing up. I will be back here in the morning, and then tomorrow I promise I'll have one of these videos done. Today was a very busy day. I actually started, my buddy and I have started looking at day trading. So if you know anything about day trading, it seems really easy, right? I could totally just make a fortune doing that. No, that's not me. But we are looking at it. So I'm now in learning mode. So if anybody has any advice, please let me know. It should be interesting. I actually look forward to new challenges, and I figure I'm looking at all these graphs. These are just DYNO graphs to me, and I'm pretty good with those. So that should transfer over directly, right? It should be fine. Should all just work out exactly the way that you think it's going to. No, it's a learning experience. It'll be cool. Yeah, buy some crypto. Yeah, I know enough not to do that. Day trading can be crazy. The nice thing about me is I'm not greedy. I'm not overly emotional. As you guys can tell, I'm not this side. I'm not this side. I'm this side. And that's the way that I approach all of this stuff. And so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to learn. And I want to know more about that kind of market. And I want to understand it better, because I think every adult should. And I think it'll be cool. Invest in gold-backed stocks. Crypto. No, none of that. I don't understand this thing that I'm trying to learn. Certainly don't understand crypto. All I know is that it's not a real thing. And that as soon as it builds up and somebody all of a sudden it just disappears, and then somebody's living on an island somewhere with somebody else's billions of dollars, that doesn't seem like a good deal. I mean, it seems like a good deal for one guy. Day trading success is about who you know, not what you know. Politics. How do you become successful by knowing somebody in day trading? Think or swim. That's what we're doing. That's what I have right now. Or become a politician, do insider trading. That would be nice, because then it's legal too. So that would that helps you be fairly successful in the market. You spread your profits, you get unusual tips. Yeah, what I'm doing has nothing to do with that. That's I don't travel in circles where that would be possible. And I'm not looking at in investor tips for IPOs and that kind of stuff. Randall, there's a lot of names that you can add to that list, and they're all people from both sides. Right now, you're probably better off buying a boat. I've had that. Way off subject. I was just joining. I have a 12-to-1 6.2 motor. Do you think I can get away with 10 pounds of boost? Yes, with the right kind of fuel. You have to have really, really high octane to do that. And on that note, it's time to go. Thank you all for showing up. I'll see you all in the morning. Pow. Pow.